Get ready for a shocking story that will leave you speechless. What happens when a woman's life takes a dark turn and a Maulvi's trust is shattered? Why did Allah punish his wife so severely? This gripping tale of betrayal, spirituality, and redemption will pull at your heartstrings and challenge everything you think you know about relationships, faith, and fate. Stay with us till the end to uncover the truth behind a tragic twist that will change the way you view life and love. Don't miss this eye-opening journey. Your perspective will never be the same again. Friends, today's story is about a woman whose story will stir your heart. Why did Allah give such a great punishment to the wife of the Maulvi? What was the tragic end of her life? And this story is for those women who wish to leave their homes and live with other men. After hearing this story, you will be astonished. Be sure to listen to it until the end. It was night, and as she lay under the blanket, lost in thought, it felt like something was troubling her heart deeply. The light in the house was dim, and there was no sound coming from anywhere. Sitting in the corner of the room, leaning against the pillow, there was something missing in her eyes. A missing piece that kept bothering her. Her name was Zanab, and the journey after her marriage had not been an easy one. After her marriage, she was in search of her spiritual path, but the traditions of the world, her dreams, and the business of marriage had pulled her away from her true path. How much of all this is really right? Zanab thought to herself. There was a complaint in her eyes, a complaint that was her own, yet she couldn't understand it. Am I truly understanding my relationships? Her husband, Maulana Saeed, had tried every possible way to explain things to her, but Zanab found peace only in her own decisions. Maulana Saeed was a great and respected religious scholar. Every word, sentence, and thought of his was connected to the true message of Islam. But Zainab's heart was immersed in the needs of the world, and she felt a lack of understanding regarding her marriage, her life, and her emotions. That night, Zanab felt more restless than ever. Hidden in the room, she wondered which path she was walking on. Am I truly understanding the purpose of my life? Has all my strength, my beauty, and the colors of the world taken over my life? Zainab's mind was changing every moment. Lost in these thoughts, she drifted into the world of her dreams. Suddenly, it felt as though a bright light surrounded her, and she experienced a strange feeling. She closed her eyes and felt like someone was speaking to her. It was a dream, yet it felt so real that Zainab thought it was a message of life. In the dream, Zainab saw herself standing at the edge of a lake, and there was nothing around her except peace. The water in the lake was crystal clear, and no one was around. Zainab's heart was filled with complete peace. But within the water of the lake, there was a hidden image showing her a path. It was the image of a beautiful flower, submerged in the water of the lake. Zainab looked at the flower and felt as if her entire life was beginning from there. "This flower is a message for me," Zainab said to her heart. "This flower shows me my true purpose, which I had forgotten." Zainab opened her eyes and felt the effect of the dream deeply in her soul. She said to herself, "Maulana Saeed's words were true. My true destination is only in the spiritual path. I must live my life in tune with my emotions, not with the needs of the world." After this dream, Zainab found a new way to understand her marriage and her beauty. When she spoke to her husband, Maulana Saeed, her response had completely changed. Zainab said to her husband, "I want to walk this path with you. I want to understand my spiritual journey." Maulana Saeed, after a brief pause, replied, "Zainab, you have found the true path of your life. To reach your life's true destination, you must understand your soul." Zainab's heart was now filled with a new light, and she no longer questioned her decision. She was moving toward her destination. At that moment, Zainab felt a peace in her heart that she had never felt before. After this peace, she began to understand her relationship and her marriage again. Friends, Allah has sent women as protectors for men, and Islam has granted women respect and honor like no other religion. But when a woman leaves her position and is drawn toward sin, her end becomes a lesson for others. Today, we are about to tell you the story of a woman who became a symbol of regret and warning because of her actions. This story is from Dhaka, Bangladesh, where in a small village a Maulvi lived who was a very pious and devoted man. His father passed away when he was a child, and his life began with many difficulties. The Maulvi fulfilled his responsibilities well and raised his younger siblings. He educated them, arranged their marriages, and tried to improve their lives. When his siblings settled in their homes and became busy with their lives, the Maulvi realized that he now had time and needed a partner to complete his journey. The Maulvi, who taught children the Quran, was the only person in the village imparting religious education. People would send their daughters to him to learn the Quran. One day, an elderly woman came to him and said, "Son, my daughter has grown up, but she has never learned the Quran." She had been pampered since childhood, and her mind had gradually shifted toward worldly desires. She hadn't even completed her schooling, preferring instead to spend her time socializing and indulging in leisure activities with friends. "Now, before I die, I want her to learn the Quran. Could you guide her?" Upon hearing this, the religious scholar was deeply concerned and said, "Don't worry. I'll teach your daughter the Quran. Just send her to me." A few days later, the elderly woman sent her daughter to the scholar, and under his guidance, the girl began to study the Quran. Gradually, she started taking steps toward the right path in life. The girl nodded in agreement, and from that day, she started attending the scholar's lessons regularly. After a few days, she completed her recitation of the Quran. One day, the widow came to the scholar's house and said, "Son, I want to say something. Please don't take offense. I'm a widow, and in my world, my daughter is all I have. My wish is that she marries a good, pious man. Please marry her to you. You've done your duty to me, and my daughter is a virtuous girl, well respected by everyone in the village." Saying this, the elderly woman began to cry. The scholar, being a man of virtue, agreed. The villagers too believed that this was the right thing to do. Eventually, the scholar married the widow's daughter, and they were happy together. The scholar, blessed by Allah, had everything he needed. He bid her farewell and took her to his home. The girl was kind, and they lived a peaceful life. However, after some time, the elderly woman passed away. The girl stopped visiting her in-laws as her mother was no longer alive to call her. Now, she stayed with her husband. A few days later, the scholar noticed that his wife had become overly obsessed with her appearance. She was always adorned in makeup, spending her time beautifying herself, while the house remained in disarray, with things scattered everywhere. She was never on time to do any household chores and always seemed preoccupied with looking attractive before her husband returned home. One day, when the scholar returned home, he saw that the house was still in a state of disarray, as it had been earlier that morning. He glanced at his wife, who had just emerged from the room, fully dressed and made up. The scholar gently said, "Stop beautifying yourself for me. I prefer simplicity. You look much better in simplicity." He spoke softly, so as not to hurt her feelings, hoping she would understand. The next day, when the scholar returned home, his wife was once again dressed up, her face adorned with makeup. He noticed that she was constantly preoccupied with worldly matters and putting her focus on her appearance. To his dismay, he had never seen her recite the Quran or perform her prayers. The scholar was a man of great patience, and he said to her, "You should engage in worship, for this is a woman's true adornment, and this will benefit you in the hereafter." However, his wife simply listened and ignored his words, allowing them to pass in one ear and out the other. This saddened the scholar deeply. As time passed, his wife became pregnant, and he began to worry about the child. He wanted a righteous, pious mother for the child, as a good mother would raise a good child. He hoped that their baby would grow up to be a hafiz of the Quran, but his wife had no interest in such matters. The scholar's routine was to leave for the mosque early, pray the Maghrib and Isha prayers, and return home afterward. One day, he felt a little unwell, so after performing the ASR prayer, he decided to return home early to rest. He assumed that the children who came to the mosque for their lessons would be taught by another scholar that day. He trudged back home, his body weary from his illness. When he reached the door, he found it strangely open. He had always emphasized that the door should remain locked, so the sight of it being open seemed odd. He took a deep breath and entered the house. What he saw next shocked him to the core, and the ground seemed to slip away from beneath his feet. His wife, whom he had always considered pious and virtuous, was in the house with a young man, someone he didn't recognize, engaged in intimate, inappropriate behavior. When he saw this with his own eyes, his fury exploded. The young man quickly fled the house while the scholar stood there, staring at his wife. His heart shattered into pieces. He walked up to her, slapped her hard across the face, and shouted, "This is what you've done to my trust and my love? You women who betray your husbands are the fuel of hell. I would never have married you if I had known this was the kind of person you were. Women like you are worse than dogs for betraying their husband's trust." With that, the scholar stormed out of the house and headed to the mosque, wanting to immerse himself in his work and the remembrance of Allah to escape the painful reality. Meanwhile, the young man spread rumors around the village, claiming that the scholar's wife was a woman of bad character and had been involved with several men, and that the scholar knew about it but stayed silent. When the villagers learned of this, they began to look at the scholar with disdain. He endured their narrow-minded judgments, but as he rose to pray the evening prayers, he was unaware of the twisted fate his wife was about to face. Later that day, when the scholar returned home after his prayers, he was greeted by a horrifying sight. His wife, the woman he had once trusted and loved, had been transformed. Her body remained human, but her face had morphed into that of a dog. She lay on the floor of their room, now on all fours, pleading with him, hands and feet joined in a desperate attempt to seek forgiveness. The transformation of the scholar's wife and the tragic ending she met spread like wildfire through the village. Word of the incident reached every household, and especially the women, when they heard about it, would pause in their work and shudder in fear. The scholar, deeply pained, spent many hours in prayer, seeking forgiveness for his wife. Despite the anguish he felt, he understood that everything, including his wife's actions, was part of Allah's plan. Days turned into weeks, and the news continued to spread. One day, as the scholar sat in the mosque, absorbed in reciting the Quran, an elderly man approached him and offered words of comfort. "Son, be patient for the sake of Allah. What has happened was destined for you. Though your heart is in pain, Allah has promised to give you patience." The scholar listened carefully, and despite the deep sorrow in his heart, he spoke aloud. "What happened was Allah's will. I thought my wife was pious and virtuous, but Allah showed me the truth I couldn't see. Now, I will live my life according to His will and accept His decisions for me." The scholar's voice carried a slight sadness, yet there was unwavering faith in Allah's wisdom. He openly discussed the situation with the people of the village, telling them that nothing compared to Allah's will, and that, through patience, one learns the wisdom of His plans. The villagers were moved by his words and began to realize that, in all circumstances, one should accept Allah's decree and ask for forgiveness for their own shortcomings. Seeing the scholar's strength and patience, the villagers came to respect him even more. They learned that true strength comes from within, and that strength is found in one's relationship with Allah and the acceptance of His will. The scholar became a living example for the village, a beacon of faith and resilience. His heart, although heavy with grief, was filled with acceptance of Allah's decisions. Over time, when the scholar would lead prayers in the mosque, his recitations carried a renewed energy. His eyes now seemed to shine with a spiritual light, as if he had drawn closer to Allah through his trials. His voice, though soft, now exuded peace, and people began to see a new strength in him. One day, during a gathering in the mosque, a young woman asked, "Maulawi Sahib, after enduring such a great trial, did you ever think about forgiving your wife?" The scholar smiled gently and replied, "My daughter, forgiveness is a noble quality, a virtue bestowed by Allah. I did try to forgive my wife, but her actions left only sorrow and pain in my heart. What I've learned from Allah is that when someone betrays you, you must cleanse your heart. Be patient and trust in Allah's plan. Allah helped me endure this trial, and I know that He will grant me the best decisions in His wisdom." The young woman and everyone present fell silent, moved by the depth of the scholar's words. His eyes reflected courage, the courage to face one's own weaknesses and recognize them. The villagers, deeply impacted by his wisdom and patience, began to change. They learned that true strength is not in avoiding hardships, but in facing them with faith in Allah's plan. After this event, the scholar decided to focus on his life's purpose, to live for the pleasure of Allah. His wife's fate was now in Allah's hands, but the scholar found peace in accepting his destiny. He devoted himself to maintaining his home, keeping himself busy with his work, and teaching the Quran to others. He frequently reminded himself, the pleasure of Allah is the most important thing. Months later, the scholar shared a message with the village. "Look, all the sorrow and pain of this world are small compared to living for the pleasure of Allah. We should thank Allah for every trial He sends, because through these trials, He teaches us patience and strengthens our ability to accept His will." The villagers wholeheartedly embraced this message, and the scholar's life took on new meaning. He knew that everything that had happened was part of Allah's plan, and that His wisdom was beyond measure. The scholar's story was not just the tale of one man's hardship, but a lesson for everyone. Through his life, people learned that no matter the sin, betrayal, or suffering one faces, the path forward is to remain steadfast on Allah's way, seek forgiveness, and trust in His mercy. From that day forward, people often said, "Beware, anyone who betrays the trust of their spouse will meet the same fate as the scholar's wife." They would remind each other to stay away from sin, unlawful relationships, and betrayal. May Allah protect us all from such sins and guide us toward righteousness. May He preserve our honor, our wealth, and our dignity. Ameen.